In the mansion, illuminated by crystal chandeliers that cast dancing shadows across Italian marble walls, the desperate cry of a baby tore through the silence of that Thursday afternoon. It was a sound that went beyond simple infantile whim. It was the scream of a soul sensing imminent loss. The young nanny, with her 26 years and trembling hands, carefully folded her last change of clothes into a worn suitcase that contrasted grotesquely with the luxury surrounding her. Each garment she packed felt like a stone in her heart, because she knew she wasn't just packing belongings, but fragments of a purpose that had kept her soul tethered to life for the past 2 years. Sometimes the purest love isn't built on blood ties, but on the invisible connection that unites two souls destined to heal each other. The businessman Sebastian Montalvo, a 42-year-old man whose fortune in real estate was as vast as his inability to express genuine affection, had made the decision that very morning. His voice had sounded firm, almost mechanical, when he informed Elena, that was the nanny's name, that her services were no longer needed. There had been no real explanation, only hollow words about changes in family dynamics and new directions. But Elena had seen the truth in his evasive eyes. His older sister, Victoria, had poisoned his mind with venomous insinuations about inappropriate bonds and undue influences. Now, as little Matthias cried in his father's arms, Elena felt her heart breaking into pieces. The 8-month-old baby extended his chubby little hands toward her, his face reddened by crying, and then something happened that would make everyone present in that room remember that moment as the breaking point. Matthias's crying transformed into something more terrifying. His lips began to acquire a worrying bluish tone, his small body shook with convulsions that weren't normal, and his eyes rolled back in a way that chilled the blood. Sebastian, for the first time in years, felt pure panic pierce his armor of control. "Call Dr. Ramirez, now!" he shouted, his voice breaking in a way he hadn't experienced since childhood. Elena ran toward them, her maternal instinct overriding any protocol or imposed boundary. She took the baby in her arms with a practiced delicacy repeated 1,000 times, and began to murmur soft words in his ear, an ancient melody her own grandmother had taught her. She pressed the child against her chest, letting him hear the beating of her heart, and little by little, miraculously, the baby's lips regained their rosy color and his sobs transformed into broken sighs. Dr. Ramirez arrived 15 minutes later, a gray-haired man with decades of pediatric experience who had attended to 3 generations of the Montalvo family. After thoroughly examining the baby, he removed his glasses and looked at Sebastian with an expression mixing amazement and concern. "Sebastian, what your son just experienced is what we call an acute anxiety crisis. In an 8-month-old baby, this is extremely rare. In fact, in my 40 years of practice, I've only seen 3 similar cases." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "This indicates a deeply rooted emotional bond. You can't simply separate them, not without potentially serious consequences for his psychological development." Sebastian looked at Elena, who held the now sleeping Matthias against her shoulder. The evening light entered through the windows and enveloped her in a golden glow, creating an image of a modern Madonna that struck him with unexpected force. For the first time, he really saw her, not as an employee, but as the person his son considered his anchor in the world. "How long?" he asked in a hoarse voice. "At least a few months. You'll need to make a gradual transition. Find someone who can be present while Elena is also there. Create an emotional bridge. If you try to tear her from his life right now, you could cause trauma that will mark him forever." Victoria, who had witnessed the entire scene from the doorway with crossed arms and a poorly disguised expression of annoyance, intervened with her shrill voice. "This is ridiculous. He's just a baby, Sebastian. He'll cry for a couple of days and forget about her. You can't let a simple employee—" "Shut up." Sebastian's voice resonated throughout the room with an intensity that surprised even himself. Victoria stepped back as if she'd been slapped. "Don't refer to her that way again. And don't tell me how to raise my son." The silence that followed was dense, loaded with unspoken tensions. Victoria left the room with furious steps that echoed like hammer blows on the marble. And Elena knew she had won a battle, but that the war had barely begun. That night, when everyone had retired and the mansion slept under the blanket of stars visible through the skylights, Elena sat in the rocking chair in Matthias's room. She opened her old notebook, the one containing torn pages that held secrets that could destroy everything, and wrote with trembling handwriting. There are truths that are like unexploded grenades. Keeping them with you is dangerous, but releasing them can destroy everything you love. I almost lost you today, little one, and I almost lost myself in the process. I don't know how much longer I can keep this secret, but I swear I'll do whatever's necessary to protect you, even if that means protecting you from the truth. And the following days brought a tense calm that was more unsettling than the storm that had preceded it. Sebastian Montalvo found himself in his office on the upper floor of the mansion, surrounded by screens showing financial charts and projections of his multiple companies. But his mind couldn't focus on the numbers that had been his only language for 2 decades. He kept seeing that image. His son with blue lips, the pure terror he'd felt thinking he might lose him, and the way Elena had managed to calm him when he had been completely useless. For the first time in his adult life, Sebastian Montalvo felt inadequate. The intercom on his desk sounded, his personal assistant's efficient voice interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Montalvo, you have a call from your ex-wife. She insists it's urgent." Sebastian closed his eyes and sighed. Valeria. Of course she would choose this moment to reappear. "Put her through." Valeria's voice came through the line, sweet as poisoned honey. "Sebastian, darling, I just heard from Victoria about the situation with the nanny. I think we should talk about what's best for Matthias." "Valeria, you haven't called to ask about your son in 3 months. What do you really want?" A crystalline laugh that he remembered finding charming once now only sounded calculating. How direct. "Fine. I'll tell you without beating around the bush. My lawyer and I have been reviewing the custody agreement. I think it's time to renegotiate the terms." Sebastian felt his blood boil. "You left your son when he was 3 months old to find yourself spiritually at a retreat in Bali. You have no right to—" "I have every right in the world. I'm his mother, and if you're going to have a stranger practically raising my son, then I think I have solid grounds to request shared custody, or maybe a full custody." The silence that followed was electric. Sebastian knew exactly what this meant. Valeria had no interest in being a mother, she never had, but custody of Matthias came with rights to the family trust established by his late mother, millions of dollars that Valeria could control in her son's name. "I'll arrive tomorrow afternoon. I expect we'll have a civilized conversation, Sebastian, for our son's sake." The line went dead, and Sebastian struck the desk with his fist, making the silver picture frame containing the only photo he had with Matthias tremble, a forced image where the baby was crying, and he looked at the camera with an uncomfortable expression. It was a constant reminder of his failure as a father. Meanwhile, in the east wing of the mansion, Elena prepared Matthias's lunch in a kitchen that seemed designed more to be photographed than to be used. The Calacata marble countertops gleamed under the natural light entering through arched windows, and the stainless steel appliances reflected her distorted image, a woman who didn't fit in this world of luxury, but who had become an essential piece of it. She hummed softly while mixing the vegetable puree, a melody her grandmother used to hum while cooking in her humble kitchen in the countryside. It was one of those songs without specific lyrics, just a sequence of notes that transported comfort and home. Matthias, sitting in his high chair, clapped on the tray and laughed, his brown eyes, so different from Sebastian's blue ones, Elena thought with a knot in her throat, shining with pure joy. "You're happy with so little, my little one," she whispered. "I wish adults could remember that wisdom." The kitchen door opened and Elena tensed, expecting to find Victoria with another of her disdainful looks, but it was Sebastian who entered, looking like he hadn't slept well. He stopped in the doorway, as if unsure whether he had permission to enter his own kitchen. Can I talk to you for a moment?" His voice was different, stripped of its usual authority, almost vulnerable. Elena nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "Of course, Mr. Montalvo." "Sebastian. Call me Sebastian." He approached the kitchen island, maintaining a careful distance. "Elena, I need to apologize to you. I was unfair to you and I almost—" His voice broke. "I almost hurt my son because of my pride." Eleanor studied him, truly seeing the man behind the three-piece suit for the first time. There were lines of exhaustion around his eyes, a tension in his shoulders that spoke of a weight he carried alone, and in that moment, something in her softened. Everyone makes mistakes, Sebastian. What's important is recognizing them. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. Your son loves you. He just needs to learn your language, and you need to learn his. I don't know how to speak that language. I never learned it. My father... He stopped, surprised to be revealing this. My father believed that showing affection was a weakness. We were raised as soldiers, not as children. Eleanor felt a pang of compassion. She had seen photos of the Montalvo patriarch on the mansion walls, a stern man with cold eyes that seemed to judge even from the oil painting. Then break that cycle. Matthias doesn't need a general. He needs a father. Sebastian looked at his son, who was now trying to reach for a spoon with adorable determination. Would you teach me? How to do that? The question floated in the air between them, loaded with a meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes, not of sadness, but of a dangerous hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Yes, I'll teach you. Valeria Sandoval de Montalvo's arrival was as dramatic as expected. A black Bentley stopped in front of the mansion exactly at 3 p.m. on Friday, and from it emerged a woman who looked like she'd stepped directly out of a fashion magazine. Valeria was 34, but could pass for 28, thanks to a combination of privileged genetics and the best dermatologist's money could buy. Her brown hair fell in perfect waves over the shoulders of her cream silk dress, and her green eyes, the only features Matthias had inherited from her, evaluated the mansion's facade as if calculating its resale value. Elena watched from the second-floor window, with Matthias in her arms. The baby was restless, as if he could sense the tension accumulating in the air like electricity before a storm. "Shh, calm down, love," Elena whispered, rocking him gently. "I won't let anyone hurt you." The meeting in Sebastian's study was tense from the first moment. Valeria sat on the Italian leather sofa with the posture of a queen, while her lawyer, a thin man with a shark's expression, spread documents on the coffee table. "Let's be clear, Sebastian," Valeria began, crossing her legs with studied grace. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want what's best for our son." "Our son that you abandoned 6 months ago," Sebastian replied, his voice sharp as a knife. Valeria didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. "I needed to heal, find my center. A mother who isn't emotionally well can't take care of her son. Now I'm ready." The lawyer intervened with a monotone voice. "My client is requesting shared custody, with Matthias spending half the year under her care. Given that Mr. Montalvo has demonstrated certain inability to handle the child's emotional needs, as evidenced by the recent medical incident, we believe our case is solid." Sebastian felt rage rise in his throat. "How dare you? Furthermore," Valeria continued, ignoring his indignation, "I have concerns about the appropriateness of your staff. Victoria has informed me that you've allowed a nanny to develop an unhealthy bond with Matthias. That doesn't speak well of your judgment as a father." For the next hour, Sebastian listened while Valeria and her lawyer presented a carefully constructed case that painted him as an absent father, obsessed with his work, who had delegated raising his son to employees. It wasn't completely false, and that's what hurt the most. Each accusation was an arrow that hit a truth he'd been avoiding facing. When they finally left, promising to return in a week to hear his reasonable offer, Sebastian remained alone in the study, feeling that the walls of his perfectly constructed life were crumbling. That night, unable to sleep, Sebastian wandered through the silent mansion. His steps led him, almost without consciously thinking, to Matthias's room. The door was ajar, and a soft light emanated from inside. He peeked in and saw Elena sitting in the rocking chair, with the sleeping baby in her arms, reading quietly from an old book. She looked up and saw him, but didn't seem surprised. "I couldn't sleep." I think he sensed the tension from the day. Sebastian entered silently and sat on the edge of the nearby ottoman. Can I hold him?" Eleanor smiled warmly and carefully transferred the sleeping baby to his father's arms. Sebastian held him awkwardly at first, but then something changed. Matthias snuggled against his chest, sighing in dreams, and Sebastian felt something inside him break and remake at the same time. "He's perfect," he whispered, his voice full of wonder. "How did I not see it before?" "Sometimes we have to lose something to realize how much we value it," Elena responded softly. They stayed like that in the silence of the night, and it was Elena who finally spoke. "Sebastian, there's something you need to know about Valeria." He looked up, alarmed by the tone of her voice. "What?" Elena hesitated, knowing she was crossing a line, but deciding that truth was more important than appropriate boundaries. "The other day when I cleaned the study, I found something. I wasn't looking, I swear, but there was an open drawer and there were documents." "What kind of documents?" "Medical records from the fertility clinic." Elena took a deep breath. "Sebastian, the documents show there were irregularities in Matthias's conception process." Sebastian's world tilted on its axis. "What kind of irregularities?" "I can't be sure without knowing more, but there were mentions of alternative donors, protocol errors, and there are letters from lawyers, confidentiality agreements, many confidentiality agreements." Sebastian looked at the baby in his arms, at his features that he'd always assumed just didn't look much like him yet. Now that doubt began to take root in his mind, like poisonous ivy. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Elena looked directly into his eyes, and there was an intensity there he hadn't seen before. "Because you deserve to know the truth, and because Matthias deserves a father who will fight for him, no matter what secrets are revealed. Family isn't just biology, Sebastian. It's choice, it's commitment, it's unconditional love." Her words resonated in the space between them, and Sebastian knew he was on the precipice of a discovery that would change everything. But as he looked at his son, because Matthias was his son, no matter what DNA said, he knew she was right. He was going to fight. For this child. For the truth. And maybe, just maybe, for the chance to become the man he never thought he could be. "Tomorrow," he said with a firm voice, "I'm going to hire investigators. I'm going to find out what's really going on, and I'm going to protect my son." Elena nodded, a mixture of relief and apprehension on her face. What she didn't tell him was that she already knew more than she was revealing. What she didn't tell him was that every truth he discovered would bring him closer to a secret she'd been keeping like ashes from a fire that had almost consumed her. What she didn't tell him was that when the truth finally came to light, she'd have to choose between her own heart and the well-being of the child who had become her reason for living. But that night, in the silence of a baby's room lit only by a moon-shaped nightlight, two broken souls began the process of healing each other, not yet knowing that the path to healing would first pass through a complete breakdown of everything they believed they knew. Monday morning dawned with a grey sky that seemed to reflect the weight of what was to come. Sebastian hired the city's best private investigators, a discreet team that worked for high-profile families and promised results in 2 weeks. He gave them a single instruction: find out everything about the fertility clinic where Matthias was conceived, about his ex-wife Valeria, and about any irregularities that might have occurred. Meanwhile, life in the mansion continued with a strange new dynamic. Sebastian began spending more time with Matthias, allowing Elena to teach him the small things that make fatherhood great: how to make the baby laugh with tickle games, how to read the different intonations of his cries, how to hold him in a way that made him feel safe but not restricted. They were simple lessons, but for Sebastian they were revolutionary. One afternoon, while Elena prepared Matthias's dinner, Sebastian tried to make him laugh with a stuffed animal, moving it exaggeratedly. The baby watched with serious concentration, as if evaluating his father's effort. Then, suddenly, he burst into a bubbly laugh that made Sebastian feel like he'd just won the most important prize of his life. "I did it! I made him laugh!" he exclaimed, with such pure emotion that Elena had to blink to hold back tears. "You did," she confirmed with a smile, "and he'll never forget that his daddy makes him laugh." But while these moments of light bloomed, shadows from the past began to close in. Victoria intensified her visits, always with some veiled critical comment about Elena's continued presence. During a family lunch on Wednesday, She dropped her venom with her characteristic subtlety. "It's just that I wonder, Sebastian, if it's healthy for a child to be so attached to someone who, at the end of the day, is just a temporary employee. What will happen when she inevitably leaves? Aren't you just postponing trauma?" Sebastian, who a month ago would have considered this argument valid, now saw the manipulation clearly. "Eleanor isn't just anything, Victoria. She's part of Matthias's life now. And if you really had his well-being at heart instead of—" He stopped, choosing not to finish the accusation dancing on his tongue. Victoria rose from the table with rigid movements. "One day you'll realize I'm only trying to protect you both." When she left, Eleanor, who had witnessed the scene while feeding Matthias in his high chair, spoke quietly. She knows something, or suspects something. Sebastian looked at her, noticing the paleness in her face. "What do you mean?" "I don't know exactly. It's just a feeling. The way she looks at me sometimes, as if she's waiting for me to reveal something." Eleanor set down the spoon and turned to face him directly. "Sebastian, there are parts of my past I haven't told you about. Things that might be relevant to what's happening now." Sebastian's heart raced. "What things?" Elena closed her eyes, as if gathering courage to jump from a cliff. 3 years ago, before coming here, I worked at San Rafael Hospital as a nursing student, specializing in pediatrics. I was part of a rotation program, and one of my shifts was in the fertility clinic associated with the hospital. The silence that followed was so dense it seemed to have physical weight. "The same clinic where—" Sebastian couldn't finish the question. "Yes, the same clinic where Matthias was conceived." Elena's words came out in a torrent now, as if carrying them for so long was a weight she could no longer bear. "It wasn't a coincidence that I applied for this job, Sebastian. When I saw the ad looking for a nanny for Sebastian Montalvo's son, I knew it was him, the baby who had been born from that mistake." Sebastian stood up so abruptly his chair fell backward. "What mistake? What the hell are you talking about?" Matthias, sensitive to the sudden tension, began to whimper. Elena took him in her arms automatically, rocking him while trying to explain something she knew would destroy multiple lives. There was a mistake in the laboratory. The technicians were overworked that day. There was an emergency on another floor, and in the confusion, they used the wrong genetic material for your wife's in vitro fertilization procedure. Tears rolled down Elena's cheeks now. "I was there. I saw when they realized. I heard the frantic calls, the emergency meetings. I was ordered to keep absolute silence, made to sign confidentiality agreements, threatened with ruining my career if I ever spoke." Sebastian gripped the back of his chair, feeling his legs might give out. "Are you saying that Matthias isn't—" "I'm saying that Matthias isn't genetically your son or Valeria's. He's the son of the wrong donors." Eleanor pressed the baby against her chest, as if she could protect him from the devastation of these words. "And I carried this secret with me all these days because when I saw you with him, when I saw how much you loved him despite your fears and awkwardness, I couldn't bear the idea of destroying that." "Why?" Sebastian's voice was barely a broken whisper. "Why did you apply for this job? Why did you care?" Elena looked down at Matthias, who had stopped crying and was now playing with a lock of her hair, completely oblivious that his world had just been turned upside down. "Because one of those wrong donors was my brother, Lucas. He donated genetic material when he was in college to pay tuition. He died 2 years later in an accident, and when I found out what had happened, when I saw in the records that there was a baby somewhere carrying his genes," her voice broke completely, "it was all I had left of him. This little life that existed because my brother had wanted to help pay for his education." Sebastian's world crumbled in that moment, every certainty on which he'd built his life revealing itself as quicksand. He looked at his son, because he was still his son, damn it, he was still his son, and then at the woman who had revealed the most devastating truth so bravely. "Does Victoria know?" he finally asked. "I don't know for sure, but I suspect she's been investigating. Maybe she hired someone, maybe she bribed someone at the clinic before it closed. It would explain why she's so desperate to push me away. And Valeria. Valeria knows, she has to know. The medical records I found, the confidentiality agreements, Everything points to her being compensated to keep quiet. That's why she left. She didn't go to find herself spiritually. She ran from the lie, and now she's back because she knows it's her chance to profit from this again. Sebastian completed the thought bitterly. If she reveals the truth, she can use my deception to get full custody and control of the trust. Elena nodded miserably. I'm so sorry, Sebastian. I should have told you from the beginning, but I was so scared. And then I got to really know you. And I saw how much you were growing, and I didn't want to ruin that. I was selfish and cowardly. Sebastian approached slowly, his mind struggling to process everything while his heart screamed a single clear truth. He extended his arms toward Matthias, and the baby went to him without hesitation, nestling against his father's chest with total confidence. You're many things, Elena, he said in a hoarse voice, but selfish and cowardly aren't on that list. You came here to protect a piece of your brother. You stayed because you saw that I was a mess who needed to learn to love. And you told me the truth when you could have kept it forever. He looked up at her, and there was something in his eyes that made Elena's heart stop. The question now is, what do we do with this truth? During the following days, Sebastian and Elena operated like conspirators in an absurd play, maintaining appearances while their minds worked frantically on how to navigate the minefield their reality had become. Sebastian cancelled the private investigators, vaguely explaining they were no longer necessary, knowing the truth he'd been seeking was much more complex and dangerous than he'd imagined. Victoria, with her sharp instinct for detecting secrets, increased her campaign of insinuations and surprise visits. On Thursday, she appeared with her daughter Camilla, a 24-year-old woman recently graduated in pedagogy, who was the complete opposite of Elena in every way. Where Elena was warm and natural, Camilla was formal and recited theories from textbooks. Where Elena sang old songs, Camilla insisted on educational classical music. Where Elena held Matthias with the ease of someone who does it by instinct, Camilla carried him like an expensive crystal piece she feared breaking. Matthias rejected her immediately, crying every time Camilla tried to approach. Victoria attributed this to the baby being spoiled, but Elena and Sebastian exchanged looks that said clearly this plan wasn't going to work. It was that same night when the mansion gate rang unexpectedly at 10 o'clock. The night employee, Beatrice, a 60-year-old woman who had worked for the Montalvo family for decades, went up to Sebastian's room with a worried expression. Sir, there's a woman at the door. She says she needs to talk urgently with Elena. She seems very upset. Elena, who was in Matthias's room trying to get him to sleep, was called. She went down the stairs with her heart pounding hard, wondering who it could be. When she opened the door, she found herself face to face with a woman about 50 years old, with eyes swollen from crying, and clothes suggesting she'd traveled in a hurry. Carmen? Elena practically whispered the name, her face going pale. What are you doing here? The woman, Carmen Fuentes, Elena's former supervisor at the hospital, practically collapsed in her arms. Elena, I'm so sorry. I tried to keep you out of this, but she's threatening to expose everything. Sebastian, who had come down hearing the commotion, watched from the vestibule shadows. Elena saw him and gestured for him to come closer. Sebastian, this is Carmen. She was my supervisor at San Rafael Hospital. Carmen, this is Sebastian Montalvo. Carmen looked at Sebastian with a mixture of guilt and determination. Mr. Montalvo, you need to know that what happened at that clinic wasn't just negligence. It was a massive cover-up, and now someone's trying to dig it all up. She took them both to Sebastian's private room, where Carmen proceeded to reveal a conspiracy that was even more twisted than Elena had known. The fertility clinic had been operating with questionable practices for years, deliberately mixing genetic material from different donors to create better results, falsifying records when they made mistakes, and bribing employees to keep silent. Your wife's case wasn't the only one, Carmen explained, her hands trembling as she accepted the tea Beatrice had prepared. There were at least 12 similar cases over a 3-year period, but yours was special, because the Montalvo family had the power and resources to destroy them completely if they discovered the truth. So they offered Valeria a deal, $10 million to keep quiet and raise the baby as if he were biologically yours. Sebastian felt the room spin around him. 10 million. That's why she left? She took the money and... She took 5 million initially with the promise of another 5 when the child turned 3, as long as the truth never came out. Carmen looked at him with pity. But now there's someone threatening to expose the entire scandal. An investigative journalist. He's been interviewing former employees, gathering documents. And if he publishes his story... Everything collapses, Elena completed quietly. Valeria loses her final payment. The Montalvo family faces a public scandal. And Matthias. Her voice broke. Matthias becomes the center of a media circus. Who's behind this? Sebastian asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Carmen hesitated, then whispered, Your sister, Victoria. She was the one who contacted the journalist. She provided him with the initial lead, I think. I think she plans to use the scandal to get custody of Matthias. It's documented that you knew about the irregularity and concealed it. Falsification of the minor's identity documents. She could make you lose not only custody, but face criminal charges. The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. A clock that had belonged to Sebastian's mother, a woman who had always valued honesty above all. Sebastian could almost hear her voice reprimanding him for building his life on lies, even ones he didn't know existed. How much time do we have? He finally asked. The journalist plans to publish in 2 weeks. Victoria scheduled a family meeting for 3 days before that, where she plans to reveal what she discovered and demand that you renounce custody voluntarily to avoid the public scandal. Eleanor stood abruptly. No. We're not going to let her do this. Sebastian, you need to talk to Valeria before Victoria can use her. We need to know exactly what she knows and what she's willing to do. Sebastian looked at her, seeing not just his son's nanny or the anonymous donor's sister, but a fighter who refused to let the powerful crush the vulnerable. You're right. Will you come with me? Tomorrow. I need your strength in this. Elena nodded without hesitation. Always. Carmen left that night with the promise to keep them informed if there were new developments. Sebastian and Elena stayed awake until dawn, planning their strategy, and at some point during those dark hours, their hands found each other over the coffee table, fingers intertwining in a silent promise to face together whatever came. The hotel where Valeria was staying was as ostentatious as expected, a glass and steel building in the financial district, with a lobby that looked more like an art gallery than a reception space. Sebastian and Eleanor arrived at noon on Friday, having left Matthias under Beatrice's care, the only employee Sebastian completely trusted now. Valeria received them in her suite with an expression of carefully calculated surprise. Sebastian, what a delightful surprise. And you brought the nanny. Should I feel flattered or insulted? Neither, Sebastian responded, his voice cold. Elena is here because she has as much right to this conversation as any of us, maybe more. Valeria raised a perfectly lined eyebrow, but something in her expression changed, a flash of recognition or perhaps fear. Oh, and why would that be? Elena stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. Because my brother, Lucas Ramirez, was the donor whose genes Matthias carries, and because I was in that clinic the day they made the mistake that changed all our lives. Color drained from Valeria's face. She sank onto the velvet sofa behind her, as if her legs could no longer support her. How long have you known? From the beginning, Elena responded, and before you ask why I didn't say anything, it was because I saw a baby who deserved to be loved unconditionally, not become the center of a legal battle over genetics and money. Sebastian took a seat facing Valeria, his eyes fixed on the woman he'd once loved enough to marry. I need you to tell me everything, Valeria. Not edited versions, not half-truths, everything. Did you know from the beginning? Valeria poured herself a glass of water with trembling hands. Not immediately. They told me when I was in my 5th month of pregnancy. They came to my house with lawyers, contracts, and panic. Pure panic in their eyes. They explained the mistake, showed me the evidence, and then put an option in front of me. We could terminate the pregnancy. They called it therapeutic abortion for medical reasons. and try again with the correct procedure. Or I could continue, have the baby, keep quiet and receive compensation that would ensure I'd never have to worry about money again. And you chose the money. Sebastian's voice was flat, emotionless, which was somehow worse than if he'd shouted. I chose not to kill a baby who had already started moving inside me. Valeria looked at him with what might have been genuine pain. Maybe I'm not maternal, Sebastian. Maybe I'm vain and superficial like you've always accused me of being. But I'm not a monster. When I felt that baby kick for the first time, it became real. I couldn't just eliminate him because he didn't have your DNA. Elena felt a flash of empathy despite herself. Why did you leave then? Why did you abandon Matthias if you felt that connection? Valeria laughed, a harsh sound without joy. Because every time I looked at him, I saw my lie. Every time you, she pointed at Sebastian, talked about how he looked like your mother or how he had your hands, I wanted to scream the truth. And I knew that if I stayed, eventually I would. So I took an excuse, the spiritual retreat, and fled. I thought if I got far enough away I could forget. But you can't forget a child, it turns out, not even one you don't plan to raise. Why did you come back now? Sebastian asked. Is it just for the remaining money? Victoria contacted me 3 weeks ago. She told me she'd discovered the truth, that she had proof, and that she planned to expose everything unless I helped her get custody of Matthias. Valeria looked at her hands. She offered to split the family trust with me if I testified that you knew about the fraud and participated in concealing it. She said we could present it as you forcing me to lie. Sebastian stood up so abruptly that Valeria flinched. And you? Were you considering it? Of course I considered it, Valeria shouted, her composure finally breaking. $5 million against losing everything when the scandal comes out anyway. What other choice did I have? The choice to do the right thing, Elena said quietly, but with a force that made them both turn to her. The choice to protect an innocent child from becoming collateral damage in selfish adults' power games. Because that's what Matthias will be if any of you continue down this path. Collateral damage. Valeria looked at her with what might have been respect. You speak as if you have a magic solution, do you? Because from where I'm sitting, this ship is sinking no matter what we do. Elena looked at Sebastian, and in her eyes he saw a proposal that was as brilliant as it was terrifying. There's a way out, but it requires all of us, you, me, Sebastian, even Victoria, to agree to put Matthias first, completely first. I'm listening, Valeria said, leaning forward, and Elena proceeded to outline a plan that was so unconventional it might work precisely because of its audacity. She proposed they reveal the truth themselves, controlling the narrative before Victoria could weaponize the information. Sebastian would publicly acknowledge that Matthias wasn't biologically his, but would present the decision to continue as his father, as a conscious act of unconditional love. Valeria would renounce any custody claims, but maintain minimal visitation rights, positioning herself as someone who had made mistakes but finally chose honesty. And what about Victoria? Sebastian asked. Do we just expect her to accept this? No, Elena responded. Victoria wants something beyond money. She wants validation. She wants to feel needed in this family. Give her a role, but one you control. Make her part of the revelation. Position her as someone who helped bring the truth to light. Take away her power to be the villain by making her part of the solution. Sebastian considered this, his mind working through the implications. It's risky. It could explode in our faces in 1,000 ways. It could, Eleanor admitted. But the alternative is certain destruction. At least this gives us a chance to control the narrative, to protect Matthias from the worst of the scandal. And more importantly, it allows you to be honest. For the first time in all of this, be completely honest. Valeria studied Elena with narrowed eyes. What's your role in all this? Why would you help Sebastian keep custody when your brother was the donor? Technically, you have a stronger genetic claim than any of us. The question floated in the air like a palpable weight. Eleanor knew this was the moment of truth, when she had to decide whether to follow the path of self-interest or something greater. My brother Lucas donated his genes hoping to help a family, not to create ownership claims over a child. Yes, I share his DNA, but that doesn't make me his mother. She looked directly at Valeria. "You carried Matthias for 9 months, felt every kick, every hiccup. That counts." Then at Sebastian. "And you've been there every day since you decided to really be his father. That counts even more. I'm just someone who loves him enough to make sure he grows up in a home where he's valued, not used as a pawn." Tears rolled down Valeria's cheeks, the first genuine tears Sebastian had seen in her in years. "I don't deserve your compassion." "Maybe not," Elena responded, "but Matthias deserves something better than a war. And that's what we should all be fighting to give him." When they left the hotel 2 hours later, with Valeria having tentatively agreed to the plan, Sebastian stopped on the sidewalk and looked at Elena with an expression she couldn't completely decipher. Gratitude, amazement, and something deeper that neither was ready to name yet. "You're extraordinary," he said simply, "and I have no idea how to thank you for fighting for my son as if he were yours." Elena smiled, a sad and sweet smile. "It's just that in a way he is. He's a piece of my brother, a piece of you, a piece of Valeria, and a piece of pure miracle. That makes him belong to all of us and none of us. The only thing that matters is who will be there for him when he needs us." In that moment, under the midday sun on a busy sidewalk, Sebastian Montalvo realized he'd fallen in love. Not the dramatic movie kind of love, but the quiet, deep kind that grows when two people reveal themselves to each other in their most naked vulnerability and choose to stay anyway. The weekend that followed was surreal in its forced normalcy. Sebastian, Elena, and Matthias existed in a temporal bubble, knowing that in just days everything would change irrevocably. Victoria had called to confirm the urgent family meeting for Tuesday, not knowing they already had their own plan in motion. Saturday morning, Sebastian took Matthias to the park for the first time, not the private park of the exclusive subdivision, but the public downtown park where families from all social strata took their children to play. Eleanor accompanied them, and together they watched as Matthias marveled at the grass under his small hands, at other babies crawling nearby, at the simple miracle of being outdoors without mansion walls around. "I've never done this," Sebastian admitted, sitting on a blanket next to Elena while Matthias explored a pile of dry leaves. "Taken him to a normal place, with normal people. I always thought he needed controlled, safe environments." "He needs real experiences," Elena responded. "He can't grow up in a bubble, Sebastian. That's why what we're going to do is important. It's not just about revealing the truth about his origin, it's about giving him the opportunity to grow up knowing he's loved for who he is, not for the DNA he carries or the last name he inherited." Sebastian reached for a leaf that Matthias offered him with a drooling smile, and accepted the gift with the seriousness it deserves when a baby shares his treasure. "I'm scared. Of the revelation, of the judgment, of how this will affect him when he's older and reads about all this on the internet." "Fear is normal. It means you care enough." Elena put her hand over his, a gesture that had become natural in recent days. "But here's the thing about fear. You either let it paralyze you, or you use it as fuel to fight harder. Matthias doesn't need a perfect father who was never afraid. He needs a father who was afraid and chose to act with love anyway." That afternoon, Beatrice prepared a family meal in the large kitchen, not in the formal dining room Sebastian usually demanded. It was simple and perfect: roasted chicken with vegetables, rice, and a fresh fruit dessert. Sitting around the kitchen table, sharing stories and laughter while Matthias clapped from his high chair, Sebastian had a glimpse of what life could be like if he let go of control and just allowed himself to be. Sunday brought an unexpected visit. Carmen, Elena's former supervisor, arrived with a box of documents. "The journalist published his story last night," she announced, her face pale. Apparently, Victoria couldn't wait. She gave him all the information early, thinking she could control the narrative. But he went beyond what she gave him. He investigated deeper. Sebastian took the newspaper Carmen extended. The headline screamed, "Fertility Clinic Scandal. Dozens of families affected by covered-up errors." The article was devastatingly thorough, naming the clinic, documenting case after case, and yes, specifically mentioning the Montalvo case as one of the most prominent. But here was the twist. The journalist had framed it not as fraud perpetrated by Sebastian, but as another family victimized by a corrupt system. He'd interviewed former employees who testified that Sebastian knew nothing, that Valeria had been pressured into silence with legal and financial threats, that the entire operation had been a cover-up from above. "Victoria must be furious," Elena murmured, reading over Sebastian's shoulder. "Her plan completely backfired," Carmen confirmed. "She wanted to be the one to reveal it, control the story. Instead, she came off as someone who tried to use the information to gain power. The journalist even has recordings of her conversations where she admits her motivations were financial, not protecting Matthias." Sebastian dropped the newspaper, feeling strangely calm. "So it's out, the truth is out there." "And now what?" Elena asked. "Now," Sebastian responded, standing with a determination that had been building for days. "Now we get ahead of the narrative. I'm going to give my own statement, confirm everything, and make it very clear that regardless of genetics, Matthias is my son and will continue to be my son. And I'm going to ask Elena for something that will probably scare us both equally." Elena stood, her heart pounding hard. "What?" Sebastian took her hands, looking directly into her eyes with an intensity that stole breath. "I want you to apply for legal co-guardianship of Matthias, not as an employee but as his family. Your brother gave him life. You've given him unconditional love from day one. You deserve to be officially recognized as part of his life." Tears immediately sprang from Elena's eyes. "Sebastian, I don't know if that's legal or appropriate, or I don't care what's appropriate. I care about what's right, and what's right is that this child," he pointed upward where Matthias was taking his nap, "has all the people who love him in his life, officially. You, me, even Valeria in some limited role. A reconstructed family based on choice, not biological accident." Carmen, who had witnessed all this with her own tears, spoke softly. "You need to know that the path you're choosing won't be easy. Public opinion can be cruel. There will be those who question every decision, who say Matthias should be put up for adoption, who accuse you of unnecessarily complicating things." "Let them talk," Elena responded with a strength that surprised even herself. "At the end of the day, Matthias will have a home full of people who chose to love him. That's more than many children have." That night, after Carmen left and Beatrice retired to her rooms, Sebastian and Elena remained in the study, working on the public statement Sebastian would give the next day. They wrote and rewrote, making sure each word communicated truth without sensationalism, love without sentimentality, responsibility without victimization. It was almost 2 a.m. when they finally finished. Sebastian leaned back on the sofa, exhausted, but strangely at peace, and Elena sat beside him, their bodies sharing warmth in the cool room. "Did you ever imagine your life would take this turn?" Elena asked quietly. "Never in a million years," Sebastian admitted. 2 months ago I was so convinced I knew how life should be. Controlled, predictable, based on clear rules and strict boundaries. And then you appeared, with your old songs and your wisdom that defies all logic, and suddenly all my rules seemed stupid." Elena laughed softly. "I don't know if I should feel flattered or insulted that I ruined your perfect system." "Flattered. Definitely flattered." Sebastian turned to look at her, and in the dim light of the study lamps he saw every nuance of expression on her face. "Elena, there's something I need to tell you. And maybe it's the worst possible time, with everything that's happening, but I can't keep it to myself any longer." Elena felt her breath catch. "What?" "I've fallen in love with you. I don't know when it happened exactly. If it was when I saw how you calmed Matthias during his crisis, or when you had the courage to tell me the truth that could have destroyed me, or maybe it was accumulating in every small moment between those." He raised his hand to softly touch her cheek. "And I don't expect you to return these feelings. I know the situation is already complicated enough, and that I'm probably the last man on earth you should get involved with, but you needed to know. You deserve to know that you're seen, valued, and loved." Elena closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks as she processed words she'd secretly wished to hear but never allowed herself to expect. "Sebastian, there are so many reasons why this is complicated. Class differences, the fact that technically I still work for you, the judgments we'll face if If you feel something too, he completed softly. But if you don't, if you only see me as the father of a child you care for, then I'll forget I said this, and we'll just be co-parents who respect each other. I won't pressure, I won't make our working relationship uncomfortable. I promise. Elena opened her eyes and looked at him, seeing not the rich, impossible businessman, but the vulnerable man who had learned to love through his son. It would be easier to say I feel nothing, simpler, safer, but I do feel something. Something that scares me because it's so deep and so real it could completely change the course of my life. And that is... Sebastian could barely breathe. Love, Elena whispered. I love you. I love how you've grown, how you fight against your own demons to be better, how you look at Matthias like he's the universe's greatest miracle. I love you in a way I didn't seek or plan, but can't deny. What happened next was inevitable and perfect. A kiss that was soft at first, tentative, as if both feared the other would break. But then it deepened, becoming a promise, a confession, a declaration that no matter what storm came, they'd face it together. When they finally separated, resting their foreheads against each other, Sebastian whispered, "You know what's the craziest thing about all this?" "What?" Elena smiled. "That if that mistake at the clinic had never happened, I never would have met you. Matthias wouldn't exist as he is. And although the path that brought us here was full of lies and pain, I wouldn't change this moment for anything in the world." Elena nodded, understanding completely. Sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the cracks of what broke. We're proof of that. They spent the rest of the night on that sofa, talking, planning, simply being together in the calm before the storm they knew would come tomorrow. And when the sun began to appear through the windows, casting golden light over them, both knew that no matter how difficult things got, they'd found something worth fighting for. Not just for Matthias, but for the possibility of a family rebuilt on truth, forgiveness, and the bravest form of love, the conscious choice to stay. Monday morning dawned with a grey sky that seemed to reflect the weight of what was to come. Sebastian woke early, finding Elena already up, preparing Matthias's breakfast with a calm he knew was feigned. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands trembled slightly as she poured milk into the bottle. "Did you sleep at all?" he asked. Approaching from behind and gently placing his hands on her shoulders, Elena leaned back against him for a moment, allowing herself that comfort. "A couple of hours. I kept going over everything in my mind, wondering if we're doing the right thing. We're doing the only thing we can do, tell the truth and face the consequences together." He kissed the top of her head, a gesture that had become natural in the last hours. "The press release goes out at 10. At 11 I have the conference scheduled. By noon, the whole country will know." The press conference had been organized in the event hall of the Montalvo Holdings corporate building. Sebastian had insisted on doing it there, on his territory, surrounded by the empire he'd built, a subtle reminder that, regardless of the scandal, he was still a man of resources and power. But this time he'd use that power to protect, not to control. At 9 in the morning, while Beatrice cared for Matthias in his rooms, Sebastian and Elena reviewed their notes one last time. Valeria would arrive directly at the event, having agreed to make a short but crucial statement, admitting her knowledge and explaining her actions. Sebastian's lawyer, a brilliant man named Roberto Cervantes, had prepared all the necessary legal documents to solidify Sebastian's position as Matthias's legal father, regardless of DNA. "Ready?" Sebastian asked, taking Elena's hand. "No," she answered honestly, "but let's go anyway." The hall was packed with reporters, cameras, and flashes when they arrived. The murmur of voices intensified when they saw them enter together. Sebastian in his impeccable suit but with a vulnerable expression, Elena in a simple but elegant dress that Carmen had helped choose, designed to project dignity without pretension. Sebastian approached the podium, his heart beating so hard he feared the microphone would pick it up. He looked at the crowd, saw familiar faces of journalists who'd interviewed him about business hundreds of times, but never about his personal life. Then he found Elena's eyes in the front row, and in them he found the courage he needed. "Good morning, thank you for coming." His voice was firm, practiced, but with genuine emotion beneath the surface. Yesterday, an article was published about a scandal at a fertility clinic that affected multiple families, including mine. I'm here today to confirm the facts of that article and add context that's crucial to fully understanding the situation. He proceeded to tell the whole story, how he and Valeria had turned to in vitro fertilization after difficulties conceiving naturally, how the clinic had made a catastrophic error using genetic material from the wrong donors, how Valeria had been pressured into silence, and how he himself hadn't known the truth until just days ago. The child I know as my son, Matthias, doesn't share my DNA. This is a scientific fact I can't change. He paused, letting those words settle. But here's the more important truth. That doesn't make him any less my son. Fatherhood isn't defined by chromosomes. It's defined by unconditional love, by being present in difficult moments and joyful ones, by consciously choosing to be the person a child can rely on. The reporters began shouting questions, but Sebastian raised a hand. I'll get to your questions, but first there's someone else who needs to speak. Valeria stepped up to the podium, visibly nervous, but determined. Her statement was brief, but powerful. I made decisions out of fear and greed that I deeply regret. I accepted money to keep silent about an error that didn't just affect me, but an innocent child. Then, when the weight of that lie became unbearable, I fled instead of facing it. Her eyes filled with tears. I have no excuses that matter, but I'm here today to tell the truth. Sebastian Montalvo knew nothing about the error. He's been deceived as much as anyone, and if anyone in this situation deserves to be called Matthias's father, it's him. Not me, who carried him 9 months but then abandoned him. Him, who's been there every day since he decided to be the father that child deserved. When Valeria stepped down from the podium, with tears running down her perfectly made-up cheeks, there was a moment of stunned silence in the room. Then questions exploded like fireworks. Mr. Montalvo, do you plan to continue having full custody? What about the biological donors? Have they been contacted? Is it true your sister tried to use this information to blackmail you? Who's the woman with you? Is she the new nanny, or is there something more there? Sebastian took a deep breath and answered each question with brutal honesty. Yes, he would maintain full custody with Valeria, having limited visitation rights if she desired them. One of the biological donors had passed away. Here he looked at Elena with tenderness, and the other was being contacted through appropriate legal channels. His sister Victoria had acted in her own interests, but he chose to forgive her in hopes the family could eventually heal. And as for Elena Ramirez isn't just my son's nanny. She's the sister of one of the donors whose genes Matthias carries, and she's demonstrated more love and dedication to that child than any of us from the day she entered our lives. He paused, knowing his next words would cause even more speculation, but not caring. I'll be requesting that she be granted legal co-guardianship, so she's officially recognized as part of Matthias's family. Because that's what she is, chosen family, true family. The murmur that followed was deafening. Camera flashes exploded like lightning. Sebastian knew tomorrow's headlines would be sensationalist, probably insinuating all kinds of things about his relationship with Elena, but as he looked toward her and saw her smile through tears, he knew he'd made the right decision. The conference lasted another hour, with Roberto Cervantes occasionally intervening to clarify legal aspects. When it finally ended, Sebastian and Elena exited through a side entrance to avoid the most persistent reporters. In the waiting car, they sank into the leather seats, exhausted, but strangely relieved. It's done, Eleanor whispered. There's no going back now. No, Sebastian agreed, taking her hand. But I wouldn't want there to be. For the first time in my life, I'm being completely honest about who I am and what I want. And what I want is to be the father Matthias needs, and to be with the woman I love. If the world has a problem with that, it's their problem, not ours. They didn't talk about the fact that, at that very moment, the story was exploding on social media, that their names were trending, that television programs were already scheduling debates about the ethics of their situation. All that would come later. For now, they just needed to get home, hug Matthias, and remind themselves why all this was worthwhile. The following days were a whirlwind of media attention that exceeded even Sebastian's worst predictions. The story had all the elements the media loved: wealth, scandal, ethical dilemmas, and a kind of unconventional love story. News programs covered it constantly. Talk shows invited psychologists and legal experts to debate the implications. Social media divided into passionate camps. There were those who supported Sebastian, seeing him as a brave father who chose love over DNA. There were those who criticized him harshly, arguing that Matthias should be placed for adoption or handed over to the biological donor's family. There were those who romanticized his relationship with Elena, calling it a modern fairy tale. And there were those who viewed it with suspicion, suggesting she'd manipulated the situation from the beginning to gain access to the Montalvo fortune. Eleanor read some of the online comments one night, late, when she couldn't sleep. The words were like knives. What kind of woman infiltrates a family like that? She clearly calculated everything from the start. The child deserves a real family, not this weird setup. They're taking advantage of an innocent baby for their own drama. Sebastian found her crying silently in the library, the light from her laptop illuminating her face in the darkness. He sat beside her, gently closed the laptop, and pulled her toward him. "Don't read those things, they're poison." "But what if they're right?" Elena sobbed. "What if I'm being selfish? What if Matthias is better off without all this complexity?" Sebastian took her by the shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "Matthias is better off with people who love him enough to fight through hell for him. That's you, that's me, that's what we're giving him. Not perfection, but unshakable love. The rest is just noise." But the noise had real consequences. Sebastian's businesses began to suffer. Some conservative clients cancelled contracts, saying they didn't want to be associated with that scandal. The Montalvo Holdings Board of Directors called an emergency meeting where several members expressed concern about how the negative publicity was affecting stock value. Victoria, in a move that surprised everyone, appeared at that meeting to defend her brother. She'd been publicly humiliated when the journalist revealed her role in leaking information, and social media had crucified her as the villain sister. But instead of hiding, she chose to face the consequences. "Sebastian has made many mistakes in his life," she told the board, her voice trembling but firm. "God knows I've made even more. But what he's doing now, choosing honesty over reputation, choosing love over appearances, that's not a mistake. That's the man our mother hoped he would become. And if this company can't support him in that, then maybe we don't deserve to carry the Montalvo name." It was an imperfect but genuine moment of redemption. After the meeting, Victoria approached Sebastian privately. "I don't expect forgiveness," as she said, looking at her shoes. "What I tried to do was unforgivable, but I want you to know that I was wrong. About Elena, about Matthias, about what constitutes a family. I saw your class differences and thought it was my duty to protect you from making a mistake, but the only mistake you made was listening to me." Sebastian studied his sister, seeing for the first time in years the girl she'd been before family and social pressures transformed her into someone bitter. "You caused harm, Victoria, real harm, but you're also family. And if I've learned anything from all this, it's that family is worth saving if they're willing to change." "I want to meet him," Victoria whispered. "Matthias, the right way this time, not trying to manipulate or control, just as his aunt." Sebastian nodded slowly. "In time. When Elena feels comfortable with it. She has a voice in all decisions about Matthias now." It was a subtle but significant shift in power. Elena was no longer just the employee following orders. She was a partner in raising Matthias, with an equal voice in all important decisions. Meanwhile, legal proceedings to grant Elena co-guardianship moved through the judicial system. It wasn't a simple process. There was no clear legal precedent for such a unique situation. The judge assigned to the case, a 60-year-old woman named Magistrate Fuentes, scheduled multiple hearings to evaluate whether the arrangement was truly in the child's best interest. During one particularly difficult hearing, the prosecutor's lawyer, assigned to represent the state's interests, argued that Matthias should be temporarily placed in foster care while his legal situation was resolved. "Your Honor," he argued, his voice full of righteous indignation. This child has been at the center of medical fraud, corporate cover-up, and is now in the middle of what can only be described as an unconventional custody arrangement. We need to ensure that his needs, not the emotional comforts of the adults involved, are the priority. Eleanor felt her world crumbling. The idea of having Matthias taken away, even temporarily, was unbearable, but before she or Sebastian could protest, Magistrate Fuentes raised a hand. "Counselor, I appreciate your concern, but I've thoroughly reviewed the psychological reports, home evaluations, and testimony from multiple experts. This child is thriving under current care. His development is in the 95th percentile for his age. He shows no signs of neglect or trauma. In fact, all indicators suggest he's in a safe, loving, and stimulating environment." She looked severely at the prosecutor. "We will not remove a child from a healthy home based on moral judgments about what constitutes a normal family. The law is concerned with the child's welfare, not with conforming to traditional family structures." It was a victory, but a small one. The magistrate still hadn't made a final decision about co-guardianship, saying she needed more time to consider the legal ramifications. That night, back at the mansion that had witnessed so many changes, Eleanor sat in Matthias's room, watching the baby sleep. He'd grown so much in the months she'd been there. Now he was 11 months old and about to take his first steps. He held onto furniture and moved sideways, always looking back to make sure she or Sebastian was nearby. Sebastian entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of tea. He sat beside her on the floor, their backs against the wall, and they simply existed together in the sacred silence of watching a child sleep. "You know what scares me most?" Elena finally whispered. "What?" "That one day, when Matthias is older and reads about all this, he'll think he was a burden, that he caused all this pain and complication just by existing." Sebastian looked at her, his heart clenching. "Then we'll make sure he knows the truth, that he was the reason we all became better people, that his existence didn't cause pain. It revealed lies that needed to be exposed, that he wasn't a burden, but the catalyst for 3 broken adults to learn what it really means to love unconditionally." Elena leaned against him, feeling the warmth of his body, the strength of his presence. "When all this started, I thought I was coming here to protect a piece of my brother. But now I realize I also came here to find myself, to learn that I can be strong even when everything's falling apart, to discover that love doesn't always come the way we plan, but it's real anyway." "Is it?" Sebastian asked softly. "Real for you?" Eleanor turned to look at him directly. "It's the most real thing I've felt in my life. I love you, Sebastian Montalvo. I love your awkwardness when you try to change diapers. I love how your voice softens when you talk to Matthias. I love your determination to be better than your upbringing. I love that you care more about being a good father than being a rich father." Sebastian kissed her then, soft and deep, and in that kiss were promises of difficult mornings together, of battles yet to be fought, of a family they'd create day by day, choice after choice. The month that followed brought a surprise none of them had anticipated. Roberto Cervantes called Sebastian one afternoon with news that would change everything again. The second biological donor, the woman whose eggs had been used by mistake, had been located and wanted to meet. Her name was Dr. Patricia Mendoza, a 43-year-old genetics researcher who had donated eggs during her residency to help with her student debt. When contacted about the clinic error, her response had been measured and surprisingly compassionate. The meeting was organized at a neutral cafe, away from curious eyes. Patricia arrived with her husband, a quiet man named Jorge, and immediately made her intentions clear. "First, I want you to know I'm not here to claim the child or cause trouble," she began, her hands intertwined with her husband's on the table. "Jorge and I have 2 teenage daughters. Our family is complete, but when I found out what happened, I felt I had a moral responsibility to at least meet the people raising a child who carries my genetic material." Eleanor felt instant respect for this woman, who could have caused chaos but instead chose maturity. "Thank you for coming. I know this must be strange for you, too." Patricia smiled warmly. "Strange is an understatement, but I've spent my career studying genetics. And there's something I know for certain. Genes provide a blueprint, but environment, love, nurturing, that's what really shapes a human being. She looked directly at Sebastian. I've researched you. I saw your press conference, read the articles, even sought expert opinions. And what I see is a man doing everything possible to be a good father in impossible circumstances. That's admirable. But you have legal rights, Sebastian pointed out. Always the businessman thinking of contingencies. How you could claim custody or at least request visitation. I could, Patricia agreed, but I won't. That child doesn't know me. I didn't carry him, didn't feed him, wasn't there for his sleepless nights or his first smiles. It would be cruel and selfish to insert myself into his life just because we share DNA. She paused. However, I would like to ask you for something. What? Eleanor asked, bracing for the worst. I'd like it if, when Matthias is older, when he has questions about his genetic origin, about traits he inherited, about family medical history, you could contact me. Patricia took out a card. I've prepared a complete file of medical information from my side of the family, genetic conditions, allergies, longevity. It could be useful for his doctors. And if one day he wants to meet me simply as a person who contributed to his existence, I'll be available. But only if that's what he wants, not what I need. It was a display of grace and wisdom so unexpected that Elena felt tears sting her eyes. This woman, who could have been one more complication, instead revealed herself as a gift, a person who understood that true love sometimes means staying in the background. Please, Patricia said, taking out her phone, could you show me even just a photo, just to know he's okay? Sebastian showed her dozens of photos, Matthias laughing, playing, sleeping, eating his first solid food. Patricia observed them with a melancholic but genuine smile, her husband holding her hand in silent support. He's beautiful, she whispered, and he looks happy. That's all that really matters. When they said goodbye in the parking lot, Patricia unexpectedly hugged Eleanor. Take good care of him, and don't let anyone make you feel your love for him is less valid because you didn't give birth to him. I did that biologically. But you're doing it in all the ways that truly matter. That night, while Eleanor told Matthias a bedtime story, Sebastian watched from the doorway. The baby was fascinated, his big eyes fixed on Eleanor as she made different voices for each character. It was such an ordinary moment, so perfect in its simplicity, that Sebastian felt his heart swell until it almost hurt. After Matthias fell asleep, they went down together to the kitchen where Beatrice had left a simple dinner prepared. As they ate, they talked about the future in a way that had seemed impossible before, because now, finally, they could see a path forward. The final hearing for co-guardianship is in 2 weeks, Sebastian said. Roberto believes that, especially after Patricia formally renounced any claim, Magistrate Fuentes will approve the arrangement. And if she doesn't, Elena asked, playing with her food, what happens then? Sebastian took her hand across the table. Then we appeal. And if that doesn't work, we'll find other ways to ensure you're a permanent part of his life. Maybe not legally on paper, but in all the ways that matter. He paused, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. But there's also another option. Elena looked up, her heart racing. What option? We could get married. The silence that followed was electric. Elena looked at him, searching for signs of joking or desperation, but only saw absolute sincerity. Sebastian, you can't propose marriage just to solve a legal problem. I'm not. He stood and knelt beside her chair, taking both hands. I'm asking you because I love you, because I can't imagine my life without you, because I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night, because I want Matthias to grow up seeing what a real marriage is, not one based on appearances or convenience, but on respect, partnership, and deep love. But the world already thinks I'm with you for your money, Elena protested, tears rolling down her cheeks. If we get married now, they'll say I manipulated you, that it was all a plan from the beginning. Let them talk. Sebastian moved closer, wiping her tears with his thumbs. I've spent my whole life worrying about what people think. It's made me miserable. I'm not giving them that power anymore. The only opinion that matters to me is yours. So I'm asking you, Elena Ramirez, Will you marry me? Not because we need it legally, but because we want to build a life together. Elena looked at this man, who had transformed from a cold businessman into someone capable of vulnerability, humor, and deep love. She thought of all the reasons she should say no: class differences, public scrutiny, the complexity of their situation. But then she thought of all the reasons to say yes: the way he made Matthias laugh, how he'd learned to recognize her needs before she expressed them, how he fought his own demons to be better every day. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." The kiss they shared in that kitchen was interrupted by a small cry from the baby monitor. They both laughed, their foreheads touching. "Welcome to the rest of our lives," Sebastian said, interrupted by diapers and nighttime crying. "I wouldn't change it for anything," Elena responded with absolute honesty, but the path to their happiness wasn't clear yet. 2 days after the proposal, Victoria appeared at the mansion with disturbing news. Despite her apparent change of heart, she still had contacts in high society circles, and those contacts brought warnings. "There's a group," she explained, accepting the tea Elena offered, with an expression that showed how much that gesture of pride had cost both women. "Conservative families who feel you're disrupting the natural order of things. They've been lobbying Magistrate Fuentes, sending letters, organizing silent protests. They're not loud, but they're powerful." "What do they want?" Sebastian asked, feeling old rage bubble up. "They want Matthias placed for adoption by an appropriate family. They argue that keeping him in this situation is selfish, that he's being used as a pawn in your—" Victoria paused, clearly uncomfortable with the words she had to repeat. "In your scandalous romance." Elena felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Can they do that? Can they really take him from us? Roberto Cervantes, who had been called in an emergency, shook his head. "Not easily. Sebastian is the legal father regardless of DNA. But they can complicate the co-guardianship process. They can make the magistrate nervous about the precedent it would set. It's politics, not law, but politics can be just as powerful." "Then we fight," Sebastian said with determination. "We fight in the courts, in the press, on every damn front necessary." "No," Elena spoke quietly, but with a force that made everyone turn to her. "We don't fight that way. That's what they want. A mud battle where we can be painted as selfish. We need to show, not tell. We need to prove that Matthias isn't being used, that he's thriving." "How do you suggest we do that?" Victoria asked, genuinely curious. Elena thought for a moment, then a slow smile spread across her face. "We open our lives. Completely. We invite an independent documentary team, not tabloid press, but ethical journalists who'll do a real report on our day-to-day. We let them film the chaotic mornings, the diapers, the laughter, the frustrations. We let the world see we're not a perfect family, but we're a real family." "It's risky," Roberto warned. "If there's anything negative, they'll use it against us." "Then we make sure there's nothing negative to find," Sebastian responded, catching Elena's vision. "Because there isn't. We're just imperfect people loving a child who needs love as best we can." The documentary began filming the following week. The director, a young woman named Martina Cruz, known for her intimate and fair portraits of non-traditional families, brought a small, discreet team. They spent 2 weeks in the mansion capturing everything, the good, the bad, and the messy realities of life with an almost 1-year-old baby. They filmed Sebastian trying to prepare breakfast and burning the tortillas, Elena singing songs in her grandmother's language while rocking Matthias to sleep. Both of them collapsed on the sofa after a particularly difficult teething night. They captured the moment when Matthias took his first wobbly steps, 3 wobbles from Elena's arms toward Sebastian's, everyone crying with joy. They documented Valeria's visits, now more frequent, where she awkwardly read children's books and slowly, painfully, learned to connect with the son she'd abandoned. They even filmed a family session with a therapist, something Sebastian had initially resisted, feeling it was admitting weakness, but that Elena had insisted was necessary. "No matter how much love you have," she'd told him, "everyone needs help navigating complex situations, and we want Matthias to grow up knowing it's okay to ask for help." In those sessions, the therapist, a wise woman named Dr. Sanchez, guided them through discussions about how they'd handle Matthias's questions about his origin, how they'd balance different parenting styles, how they'd navigate public scrutiny while maintaining their privacy as a family. A particularly powerful scene occurred when Martina asked each of them to complete the sentence. "To me, family means," Sebastian had responded. "Family means choosing to be present even when it's difficult. It means growing and changing, because someone else needs you to be your best version." Elena had said, "Family means being the refuge where someone can be completely themselves. It means love that has no conditions or expectations beyond 'I choose you' every day." And surprisingly, Victoria, who had asked to be included to make amends for her earlier actions, "Family means forgiveness. It means recognizing we all make mistakes, but what matters is whether we're willing to change." The final hearing arrived on a clear, bright April day. Matthias was now 1-year-old, and Elena carried him on her hip as they entered the courthouse. The baby played with a lock of her hair, completely oblivious that his future was being decided. The courtroom was packed. Journalists lined along the walls, families who had been affected by the clinic scandal coming to show support, and even some of the conservative families who opposed the arrangement. Magistrate Fuentes entered, her expression serious and inscrutable. She had reviewed the documentary, which had now been edited into a 40-minute short, along with months of social services reports, psychological evaluations, and expert testimony. "This has been one of the most complex and emotionally charged cases I've presided over in 30 years on the bench," she began. "I've heard passionate arguments from all sides. I've reviewed legal precedents, considered long-term implications, and spent many sleepless nights wondering what the truly right decision is." Elena felt her heart about to explode from her chest. Sebastian squeezed her hand under the court table. "The law exists to protect the vulnerable, especially children. And for a long time our interpretation of protection meant conformity to traditional family structures. But families have evolved." The magistrate looked directly at Sebastian, then at Elena. "What I see in this case isn't a scandal or a convenient arrangement. I see adults who made mistakes, faced difficult truths, and chose to put a child's needs above their own comfort." She paused, letting her words settle. "I see a child who, by all medical and psychological measures, is thriving. A child who is loved unconditionally, who has access to excellent resources, but more importantly, who has access to emotionally available adults committed to his well-being." Elena began crying silently. She knew what was coming. "Therefore, it is my decision to grant legal co-guardianship to Elena Ramirez. Matias Montalvo will have 2 legal guardians with equal rights and responsibilities. His adoptive father, Sebastian Montalvo, and Elena Ramirez." The magistrate smiled, a rare expression on her usually serious face. "And if I may step outside protocol for a moment, I hope this child grows up knowing how fortunate he is to have so many people fighting so fiercely to love him well." The courtroom erupted in applause and crying. Sebastian and Elena hugged, with Matthias happily squished between them, laughing because the adults had finally calmed down after all that silly tension. Valeria, seated in the back, cried quietly. Victoria approached and offered her a tissue, a small gesture of solidarity between 2 women who had learned painful lessons about what truly mattered. Roberto Cervantes had a huge smile on his face. Patricia Mendoza, who had come as an observer, wiped her eyes, her husband holding her hand. "Furthermore," the magistrate added, clearly enjoying the moment, "I understand there are wedding plans in the near future. Congratulations, and may you have a long and happy life together." The months that followed were the most joyful any of them could remember. The wedding was small and intimate, only close family and true friends in the mansion garden, which Elena had transformed from a formal space into something warmer and more welcoming. Matthias was the ring-bearer, though he mainly chewed on the ring pillow while Beatrice held him in her arms during the ceremony. Valeria came, sitting in the back row but coming to the reception, where she apologized again to both. "I don't expect us to be friends, but I hope someday we can be friendly for him." Victoria had organized the decorations, an act of service that was her way of saying what she couldn't express in words. And when Matthias squealed with excitement during the vows, interrupting the solemn moment, Everyone laughed and decided it was perfect. Eleanor wore a simple ivory lace dress her mother had worn at her wedding, altered to fit, but keeping the traditional embroidery that told stories of her heritage. Sebastian cried when he saw her walk toward him, because she was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was his and he was hers, and they had chosen this. Their vows were honest in a way that made everyone present cry. Sebastian said, "Eleanor, I didn't know the difference between control and strength until I met you. I didn't know I could be vulnerable without being weak. You taught me that family is something we build, not something we simply receive. You taught me that true love isn't perfect, it's committed. I promise to keep learning from you every day. I promise to be the father Matthias needs. I promise to be the partner you deserve, and I promise to never stop choosing you." Elena responded with a trembling voice, "Sebastian, I came into your life carrying secrets and pain, thinking I was only here to honor my brother's memory. But you gave me something I didn't know I was looking for, a reason to fully live again. You gave me permission to love without reservations. You showed me that real strength is admitting when we're wrong and changing. I promise to be your partner in all things. I promise to challenge you when you need to be challenged and hold you when you need to rest. And I promise that Matthias will grow up knowing he was the greatest gift life gave us." The honeymoon was non-traditional. They took Matthias with them to a quiet cabin in the mountains, where there was no Wi-Fi or television, just time together as a family. They hiked, cooked simple meals, let Matthias explore in the grass, and talked about the future they wanted to build. "I want us to have more children," Sebastian said one night, with Matthias asleep in the adjacent room. "Not to replace him or dilute our love for him, but because I know now that I have enough love to give, and I think you'd be an incredible mother." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest. "I've thought about it too, but only if it happens naturally. No more clinics, no more interventions. If it happens, it happens. If not, Matthias is more than enough." "More than enough," Sebastian agreed, kissing her forehead. Back home, life settled into a new normalcy. Sebastian delegated more at work, choosing to be present for Matthias's milestones instead of missing another moment. Elena re-enrolled in university to finish her nursing degree. Sebastian insisted on paying, and she finally accepted, recognizing that pride sometimes gets in the way of dreams. Victoria became a regular but respectful presence, arriving on Sundays for family brunch, where she slowly learned to relate to her nephew without trying to control. Her daughter Camilla, surprisingly, became a trusted occasional babysitter, having learned from her mother's mistakes. Valeria established a pattern of monthly visits, enough to maintain a connection, but not so frequent as to confuse Matthias. Slowly, painfully, she began to resemble a mother, or at least a maternal figure who cared. Patricia Mendoza sent occasional packages, age-appropriate scientific children's books, updated family medical history information, kind notes saying, "Thinking of you." Never imposing, always respectful of boundaries. The documentary aired on a national platform, generating renewed debates about non-traditional families, fertility ethics, and the true meaning of parenthood. But this time, the conversation was more nuanced, less sensationalist. People were beginning to see the humanity in complex situations. And Matthias thrived. At 18 months, he was running all over the house, a whirlwind of energy and joy. He called Sebastian Daddy and Elena Mama without confusion, because for him it was simple. These were his parents, the people who loved him, fed him, read him stories and sang him songs. One afternoon, while playing in the garden that now had a play area combining modern elements with a corner of traditional herbs Elena had planted, Matthias found a worm. He held it with childish fascination, and both parents rushed over to see his discovery. "Look, look!" he shouted with his limited vocabulary but unlimited enthusiasm. "It's beautiful," Elena said, kneeling. "It needs to go back to the earth, but we can watch it first." Sebastian watched his wife and son examining the worm with scientific seriousness and thought about how much his life had changed. 18 months ago, he wouldn't have noticed a worm, wouldn't have had time for small miracles. "Daddy, come?" Matthias asked, extending his free little hand, and Sebastian knelt in the grass, ruining his dress pants without thinking twice, because this This moment of shared wonder over an insignificant creature was infinitely more important than staying pristine. 5 years later, on a bright spring day, Matias Montalvo celebrated his 6th birthday. The garden was filled with neighborhood children, because Elena had insisted Matias attend a normal, not exclusive school, where he could make friends from all backgrounds. There were balloons and a dessert table that combined traditional cookies Elena had baked with an elaborate birthday cake from the city's best bakery. Sebastian, now 47, with some grey hair that Elena said made him look distinguished, watched as his son laughed with his friends. Beside him, Elena held their 2-year-old daughter, Luna, who had arrived unexpectedly 3 years after the wedding, a pregnancy discovered when Elena had almost finished her university degree. "I can't believe he's 6, Sebastian murmured. "It seems like yesterday I almost lost him because of my stupidity." "But you didn't lose him," Elena responded, leaning against him. "You found something better, a real family." Victoria, who now had a warm if still sometimes complicated relationship with everyone, was helping organize the games. Valeria had sent a generous gift, but sent apologies. She was in intensive therapy working on herself, and everyone had agreed it was healthiest. As the sun began to set, the children were picked up by their parents one by one. Matias, tired but radiant, sat between his parents on the porch steps, with Luna asleep in Elena's lap. "Dad, Mom, can I ask a question?" he said, his voice serious in the way only 6-year-olds can be. "Always, sweetheart," Elena responded. "Tommy at school said his parents aren't happy being married. He says they fight a lot." Matias looked at them with his big brown eyes. "Are you happy being married?" Sebastian and Elena exchanged glances, smiling at their son's direct question. "Yes," Sebastian said. "We're very happy, but you know what? Being happy doesn't mean we never disagree or have difficult days. It means we choose to work through our problems together." "And would you choose me again?" The question was asked casually, but there was a vulnerability in it that broke their hearts. Elena set Luna in Sebastian's arms and knelt in front of Matias, taking his hands. "Sweetheart, there's something important we want you to know. When you're older, you'll learn more complex details. But for now, what you need to know is this. We choose you every day. From the moment you came into our lives, you've been chosen, loved, and valued." "Even when I'm naughty?" he asked with a mischievous smile. Sebastian laughed. "Especially when you're naughty, because that means you're a normal, happy child who feels safe enough to test boundaries. And yes, sometimes you frustrate us. But never, not for a second, do we not want you." Matias thought about it for a moment, then nodded, satisfied. "Okay, I just wanted to make sure." And just like that, with childhood's resilience, he jumped up and ran to where Victoria was calling him to show him something. "Do you think the day will come?" Elena asked softly. "When he'll want to know the whole story?" "It will come," Sebastian agreed. "And when it does, we'll tell him the truth. About the mistake, about the pain, about all the imperfect people who made imperfect decisions. But we'll also tell him about the love that emerged from that chaos. We'll tell him he was the catalyst that transformed his dad from a cold man into someone capable of feeling deeply. We'll tell him his mom came to us carrying his brother's gift, not just his genes, but his spirit of kindness. And we'll tell him he's loved not because he was perfectly planned, but because he was completely received," Elena added, "that the family he chose to grow up in was built on truth, forgiveness, and the belief that love is stronger than biology." That night, after everyone had left and the children were in bed, Sebastian and Elena sat on the second-floor balcony that now served as their private refuge. The city glittered before them, millions of lights representing millions of stories, each as complicated as theirs. "You know what I realized today?" Sebastian said, his arm around her shoulders. "What?" "That all my life I pursued the wrong kind of success. I thought it was about money, power, control. I thought I needed a life that looked perfect from the outside." He kissed her temple. "But real success is this: a child who feels safe enough to ask questions, a daughter who smiles every time she sees me, a wife who knows me at my worst moments and chooses to stay anyway, a family we built from the ashes of mistakes and lies." Elena turned to look at him, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. "You know what I realized?" "What?" "That I came here looking for a piece of my brother, thinking it was the closest I'd get to the family I lost. But I found something much better. I found my own family, one I chose, and that chose me back. And I think Lucas would be proud, not just of Matthias, but of the life he helped create with his gift without knowing." They sat in silence for a long while, simply existing together in the peace they'd fought so hard to achieve. Below, in Matthias's room, the baby monitor captured his soft, regular breathing, the most beautiful sound either of them knew. In Luna's room, similar sounds spoke of innocent dreams and mornings full of possibility. And in that moment, Sebastian Montalvo, a man who once thought love was a weakness, that vulnerability was a danger, that family was just a social obligation, knew with absolute certainty that he'd found his purpose. Not in boardrooms or investment portfolios, but in these ordinary, extraordinary moments of being a father, husband, partner. "I love you," he whispered to Elena. "Thank you for teaching me how." "I love you too," she responded. "Thank you for being brave enough to learn." Because in the end, the best families aren't those that start with perfection, but those that choose to grow through imperfection. They're not defined by blood or legal documents, but by the daily decision to show up, love fiercely, and never give up on each other. They're not fairy tale stories where everything resolves magically, but real narratives where broken people find each other and decide to heal together. And sometimes, just sometimes, those families begin with a mistake, a twist of fate that seems like a tragedy but turns out to be the greatest gift. A baby who refused to lose his nanny, a nanny who couldn't abandon the baby, a father who learned that true love has nothing to do with DNA. In the garden of the Montalvo mansion, now filled with children's toys and lovingly planted herbs, a swing gently rocks in the night breeze. Tomorrow Matthias will use it again, pushing himself higher while laughing with abandon. Luna will try to copy her big brother, and both parents will rush to catch her if she falls. It's an imperfect life, complicated, full of questions that have no easy answers. But it's real, it's chosen, and it's theirs. And that, in the end, is all that truly matters. Epilogue, 10 years later. The Montalvo Ramirez house, that's how it appeared on the mailbox now, a symbol of union rather than possession, buzzed with activity one Saturday afternoon. Matthias, now 16, helped his 12-year-old sister Luna with a science project, while their 7-year-old brother, Diego, who had arrived as another surprise 3 years after Luna, built block towers just to knock them down with destructive joy. Elena, now chief pediatric nurse at the hospital where she'd once been a student, prepared dinner in the kitchen that had seen so many changes, so many important conversations, so many tears and laughter. Sebastian came home early, something he did regularly now, and went straight to help her, a ritual they'd perfected in almost 11 years of marriage. "How was your day?" he asked, kissing her cheek. "Long but good. We saved 2 premature babies, so I count that as a victory," she smiled. "Yours?" "I signed the deal to convert 3 of our commercial buildings into affordable housing. Victoria is furious. She says I'm wasting assets. But I think Mum would be proud." "Your mother would definitely be proud," Elena agreed. "By the way, Matthias has been asking again." Sebastian knew immediately what it was about. About his origin. Yes, he's more insistent now. I think he's ready for the whole story. That night, after dinner, and when the younger children were asleep, Matthias asked to speak with his parents. At 16, he was a fascinating mix of both. He had the height and build of his biological father, Lucas, the eyes of his biological mother, Patricia, but the manners, character, and heart that could only have come from being raised by Sebastian and Elena. "I want to know everything," he said, sitting across from them in the family room. Not the children's version, the real truth. So they told him. Everything, the clinic mistake, Valeria's lie, Elena's connection to Lucas, the legal battles, the scandal, the doubts, the fears, the impossible choices they made. Matthias listened in silence, processing information that confirmed suspicions he'd had but never articulated. When they finished, he sat quietly for a long moment. First, can I meet her?" he finally asked. "Patricia, The woman whose genetic material I carry. Of course, Elena said immediately. She's made it clear for years that she'd be open to that when you were ready. And Lucas, my biological uncle. Matthias looked at Elena. Can you tell me about him? Elena smiled through tears. I can tell you everything about him. And tomorrow, if you want, I can show you photos, videos, take you to the places he loved. Does this change anything? Sebastian asked, unable to hide the vulnerability in his voice. Between us? Matthias looked at him with an expression of disbelief. Dad, you're my father, period. Not because we share DNA, clearly we don't, but because you've been there for every soccer game, every failed test, every late-night crisis about the meaning of life. Because when I was scared, you were the one who calmed me down. Because you showed me what it means to be a good man, not by telling me, but by being one. Tears rolled freely down Sebastian's cheeks now. Thank you, son. And Mom, Matthias turned to Elena, you gave me something I didn't even know I needed. The connection to a part of my history. Not just Uncle Lucas, but your whole family, your culture, the songs and stories that make me feel rooted in something bigger. And you did it while also just being Mom. The best Mom. Elena couldn't speak, could only hug him while she cried. But there's something else I want, Matthias said when they finally separated. What? Both parents asked. I want you to know that if you ever have another medical mistake, he smiled, another baby that wasn't planned or expected, I'll be an incredible big brother. Because what you taught me is that family isn't about perfection, it's about showing up. Sebastian and Elena laughed through their tears, hugging their oldest son, this young man who had grown so wise, so kind, so completely himself. Later, Elena found Sebastian in the study, looking at a photo from those early days. 8-month-old Matthias with blue lips, the moment that had changed everything. I can't believe we almost lost him, Sebastian said, that I almost pushed him away because of stupid pride. But you didn't, Elena responded, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. You chose love over ego. You chose growth over control. You chose family over convention. Sebastian turned to look at her, this woman who had come into his life like a silent hurricane and completely transformed him. You know what's crazy? What? That if I could go back and prevent that mistake at the clinic, I wouldn't. Because then we wouldn't have Matthias exactly as he is. I wouldn't have you. I wouldn't have this life I was never imaginative enough to dream of. Elena smiled, that smile that still made his heart skip after all these years. I wouldn't change it either. Not a single painful moment, because each one brought us here. They kissed then, soft and deep, a kiss that contained 11 years of shared history, 3 children, 1,000 battles fought together, and a future they'd continue building day by day, choice by choice. Outside, the moon shone over the garden where Matthias had once found a worm, where Luna now planted her own herbs following her mother's teachings, where Diego would build forts tomorrow. It was a garden that had seen seasons of growth and decline, that had witnessed tears and laughter, that contained within its soil all the secrets and triumphs of a family that refused to be defined by others. And in the mansion that had once been a cold mausoleum to success, but was now a home filled with life, love, and glorious chaos, the Montalvo Ramirez family slept under one roof, united not by accident of birth but by conscious choice, renewed each dawn. Because in the end, the truest love is the one not handed to you, but the one you choose to build. Brick by brick, mistake after mistake, forgiveness after forgiveness. It's the love that says, I see you in your entirety, your flaws, your fears, your complicated past, and I choose you anyway. It's the love of a nanny who refused to abandon a baby who wasn't hers. It's the love of a businessman who learned that vulnerability is strength. It's the love of a child who taught 2 broken adults how to heal. And it's enough. More than enough. It's everything.